During the most recent episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, Maher took the time to celebrate the nationwide No Kings protests and rallies, which, at the time of recording, are occurring right now, Saturday, as well as to brutally excoriate Donald Trump, Karoline Leavitt, his White House press secretary, and the MAGA Republican politicians who are engaging in rhetoric about the Democratic Party, which Maher regards as insane, and also, he believes, sinisterly designed to incite violence, which I also believe. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we've got a couple of clips here to play of Bill Maher, starting with this one in which he calls out Karoline Leavitt.
What is going on? Karoline Leavitt, as I mentioned in the monologue, this is the president's spokesperson. This is not just somebody at the end of the bar. Right. This is not just somebody ranting on social media. The Democratic Party's main constituency is made up of Hamas terrorists, illegal aliens, and violent criminals.
So let's stop right there. This is something that I've been talking about quite a bit in the past 48 hours for the reason that Bill Maher lays out, which is that Leavitt is the White House spokesperson. She's basically, if you ever watch The Lord of the Rings or read The Lord of the Rings, there's this idea of the mouth of Sauron, right? This one creature which is supposed to speak on behalf of the Dark Lord Sauron. That is Karoline Leavitt. Okay, she may not wield a lot of formal power, but as press secretary, you are the most visible member of the administration outside the president himself. You speak on his behalf. You effectively speak with his voice in terms of proclamations. And here she is demonizing half the country. The main constituency of the Democratic Party are illegal aliens, violent criminals, and pro-Hamas terrorists. That is a disgraceful thing to say about tens of millions of Americans. And some people say, well, you remember that speech? Joe Biden gave that speech in July 4th, Independence Hall, the red light Joe Biden speech where he was saying all kinds of things about Republicans, except Joe Biden went out of his way to repeatedly say, he goes, I'm not talking about all Republicans. I'm not even talking about a majority of Republicans. I think a majority of Republicans, even though we disagree, they just have different views on the country and policy, et cetera, and so forth. Joe Biden, in that very speech, went out of his way to say, I am only referring to a select group of people, not the Republican Party writ large. Karoline Leavitt did the opposite. Karoline Leavitt said the main constituency of the Democratic Party are evil. And by the way, we shouldn't be surprised because this is shit that Trump has said himself out of his own mouth, right? So what she said isn't an outlier. It aligns with things that Donald Trump has said publicly on camera time and time again about the Democratic Party. Remember what he said on July 4th of this year? The Democrats hate me, but that's okay. I hate them too. We played that clip time and time again. He constantly has demonized half this country, people who criticize him or don't support him or don't vote for him in ways we have simply never heard a Democratic president, no matter how divisive you find them, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, ever speak about the Republican Party. So good on Bill Maher for calling that shit out and drawing the necessary outrage. He goes on to say that this actually ties into the No Kings protests, which again, in June, they were the biggest single-day protests in American history, and this one here in October is understood or projected to likely to be even bigger in terms of participation than the one in June.
And this is what the No Kings thing is about, if people are wondering, is that it looks to me like either they really believe this, which is insane, or they are just always looking for a pretext to say, to let the other side take over this country is just unthinkable. I mean, if you really believe this, I would vote for a right-wing coup if I really thought half the country was Hamas terrorists, illegal aliens, and violent criminals. What do we do about that?
They're not taking the Governor Schwarzenegger approach to trying to bring people together. That's for sure.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, who used to be the Republican governor of California, in addition to being, one of the biggest actors of all time, he was interviewed by Bill Maher. And this most recent episode of Bill Maher, I should say, has a lot of content in it, which probably merits like 4 or 5 different videos because there are a lot of interesting things discussed and points made. Bill Maher got fed up during his new rule monologue with Republicans. We'll probably do a video about that. But yeah, so that was Andrew Ross Sorkin of CNBC News saying, Schwarzenegger is trying to bring people together, and the Republicans in today of the Trump era obviously have a different approach. And then liberal billionaire Mark Cuban also weighs in.
I think they're signaling to all right-wing media. That's what they do really well. The top creates the rage bait, and then all the right-wing podcasters and all the right-wing news sources, they go and get in alignment with the same thing. That's what they're really good at, rage farming.
I agree, but these people aren't. The sad thing is, I mean, he's not wrong, and I know he's not making excuses for them, but the sad thing is these aren't random MAGA influencers. This isn't Tim Pool. It's not Benny Johnson. It's not Megyn Kelly even, who do have, I would argue, some degree of responsibility as influential podcasters, commentators. But these are people who occupy public office. They wield state power. Donald Trump is the most powerful and important person on earth as the sitting president, and he routinely regurgitates this what Mark Cuban calls hate farming bullshit as if he were a YouTuber. Well, go be a YouTuber, asshole. Don't go be president. And so I'm with Bill Maher on this. I mean, like, they would love nothing more. And that's why, I just got back from my No Kings protest in Charlotte, and it was very peaceful. We started early. I don't know what the total numbers are, but certainly thousands, if not tens of thousands. And it was peaceful. It was just peaceful. People were chanting. There were people wearing like inflatable dinosaur costumes and unicorn costumes. And like, it was fun. The weather was beautiful. There were no incidents. But obviously, when you're talking about, again, what's likely to be the biggest single-day protest in U.S. history, it's entirely possible that there will be some instance. But I assure you, No Kings, both in terms of its literature, in terms of its website, in terms of what they said in the speeches, they really emphasize peaceful, peaceful, peaceful protest. Not only because peaceful protest is what's constitutionally protected, but they recognize, as Bill Maher is pointing out, that the Trump administration, they are just horny for a pretext to crack down, to unleash the National Guard and the military, right? And so it's incumbent on everybody who participates in a No Kings protest anywhere to stay peaceful, because they're looking to farm outrage, and I think they're looking to farm violence as well and use it as a pretext to accrue more power. If you look at the New York Times or CNN or whatever, they're constantly updating websites about this. Protesters denouncing Trump unite across the country. Demonstrators were expected to rally in more than 2,600 cities and towns for No Kings events. Thousands of protesters gathered in cities and towns across the nation on Saturday to condemn a president they view as acting like a king, part of a day-long mass demonstration against the Trump administration. By noon, a large crowd had flooded Times Square in New York amid a carnival-like atmosphere with colorful signs, one that announced, "I pledge allegiance to no king." Protesters sported costumes, including the inflatable frog costume that activists in Portland, Oregon began wearing to poke fun at the White House's attempts to portray activists as anarchists or domestic terrorists. Quote, "No more Trump," the crowd chanted as they waved American flags. Known as No Kings Day, the events are building off a previous demonstration in June that had considerable turnouts at roughly 2,000 rallies in all 50 states. This time, about 600 additional protests were scheduled to take place, a majority of those in rural areas, said the national spokeswoman for the coalition behind the event. In Atlanta, thousands arrived at downtown parking lot where the mood was mellow, but attendees expressed frustration over the tactics of the Trump administration. Among them was Catherine Browning, a British national who wore a bright green frog onesie. Quote, "I really feel like I needed to be here today because so many horrible things are happening to so many people," she added, citing actions by federal immigration agents that are dehumanizing people, and so on and so forth. They give examples, little anecdotes and snapshots of where these are occurring across the country. The events are still going on. Charlotte's is over officially, but they're still they're staggered timelines across the country and where these events are taking place. But I just want to wrap up by saying this. It's interesting that we just closed on a British national. As you all know, as I've repeatedly said, with much love to Presidents Lincoln and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, my favorite president is George Washington. And what's interesting is, so you had this woman here we just quoted, a British national. The British still have a king. They still have a king, King Charles, right? And this country was founded, the United States of America was founded in a rebellion against a king, King George III. And George Washington was the one who led that rebellion as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. And then after the war was won, he was president of the Constitutional Convention. And then, of course, he became the first American president. He won the vote unanimously, the Electoral College unanimously, and became president and served 2 terms. And he did actually all of this pretty much against his will. He did want to be commander-in-chief of the militia, but he was basically drafted into it. He didn't want to be the president of the Constitutional Convention, but he was persuaded to become that. He didn't want to be the first president, but again, the founding fathers, the rest of them, you're basically the most popular unifying figure in this country, and if you're not president, we're fucked. And they were probably right. And so he became president. They convinced him, even though he hated a large swath of serving his first term because it was really frustrating and complex, and there were a lot of tension and stress trying to keep this fledgling country alive. They convinced him to vote for a second term. And then after that, he said, nope, I'm done. I've done my duty. I'm done. He could have been president for life, but chose not to. And anecdotally, General Washington, then General Washington's officers at the end of the Revolutionary War said, hey, listen, if you want, you can overthrow the Continental Congress and declare yourself king, because that is typically what military leaders did. They didn't overthrow monarchies to establish constitutional democratic republics. They overthrew monarchies to replace them with monarchies with them as the monarch. That was the norm and expectation. And then then General Washington was reported to have said, do you really think I led the fight against George III to become George I? And he renounced his commission. He walked into Congress. He turned over his sword and he left. And that was a demonstration of civilian leadership over the military. And again, a commitment to creating a constitutional democratic republic. And the reason that right there, like what he did with respect to turning over military power, and then again, basically have to be dragged into the highest offices in the land, be it as commander-in-chief of the Continental Army or as president of the United States. Washington had a Cincinnatus like mythological relationship with power. Obviously, he wasn't a perfect man or even a perfect president, and yet the sort of attitude he embodied is the antithesis of what we see in Trump. It is because of Washington that we don't have a king or a president that's not supposed to be like a king. We're not supposed to even have a quasi-king. And Donald Trump is trying to undo what Washington started and was maintained by pretty much every president for the most part until Trump. And so no King's Day is not, as some MAGA Republicans say, well, excuse me, of course we don't have a king because a real king wouldn't allow these protests to occur in the first place. No, assholes, we're not saying that Trump is a king now. We're saying that he wants to be a king. And millions of Americans who support him cultishly also want him to be a king. And that's really creepy, and that's wrong. It's unpatriotic, it's un-American. So I will be excited to review with you tomorrow the full scope of the No Kings protest, which I hope remain peaceful and large and loud. And hopefully it embarrasses and humiliates the shit out of Donald Trump. And in the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.